Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the organizers for having me here to talk with you about this question of who we're trying to help with information retrieval, how, and really importantly, why. And I've subtitled the talk Provocations because I'm really hoping to start more conversations than provide answers. But we're here at the IR4U2 workshop. At least I hope that's what you're looking for. The other workshops are down the hall. But the question that I want to talk about today is why? And so we've got a relatively small group. Does anyone want to say why they're interested in this problem of IR for understudied users? And what I want to talk today about is to get underneath some of these reasons. The kind of the why behind the why. Like, we want to ensure that our systems are more usable for people who don't have access to them, more usable in context with low resource languages. Get resources to support information access for people who don't have great access to it. But underneath those is a layer of reasons of like, why do we care about that family of problems in the first place? And that's what I want to talk about today. To talk about some various reasons that can be behind the reasons, even if we don't articulate them explicitly. And particularly to discuss why those underlying reasons matter and what consequences they might have for how we go about this work and how we resolve and think about some of the difficulties and challenges that arise in this work. So really, not to tell you why you're here, but to tell you why it matters why you're here. That's the big thing that I want to accomplish today. As I said, don't expect to get like answers from my talk today. I want to raise and start a lot more questions and provocations than provide conclusions, but I will have some candidate conclusions. But the really short summary is that I've come to believe, as I've been wrestling through various problems in algorithmic fairness, that the reasons why we're trying to pursue things like providing information access to understudied users, providing fair information access, and all of the complexity and everything that that means, that the reasons why we're doing it can provide really valuable guidance for navigating trade-offs, for wrestling moral complexities that arise, for understanding the limits of when this tool is not the right tool for the job. And so I come to this to tell you a bit about like how I got to this particular topic and the material I want to treat today. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how AI in general, but particularly information access technology, can go horribly wrong and can cause or exacerbate harm. And like, there's some discourse on AI harms and things that are like, oh, the Terminator is going to come and destroy us all. The Terminator might come with an information need for clothes, boots, and a motorcycle, but that's not the set of problems that I'm most concerned with. I'm a lot more concerned with how the IR technologies that we're building interact with the things that humans are doing and exacerbate harm that humans try to cause to each other, or create new platforms and new avenues for that harm in some cases, or are providing benefits, but are not providing those benefits equitably across all the various members of our society. And so I've done a lot of work on this. It's been the thing that's consumed most of my attention for the last 8 years. I've been doing other things too, but this has consumed a lot of my attention for the last 8 years. And I do see a significant connection between what we're talking about here today and questions of fairness. I mean, we all kind of like, we have a hammer, everything's a nail, so we see things through our lens, but when we're thinking about trying to make information retrieval more useful, more effective for people for whom it is not currently effective, we are talking about a form of a consumer-side fairness problem of ensuring that the benefits, equity, et cetera, or the benefits, utility, et cetera, of information retrieval is available to everybody. And as a quick teaser, we're going to be talking more about this in our paper in the IR4U2 track on Thursday, for those of you who are still here, where we dive into really broadly, a really broad view of the different consumer-side impacts of information retrieval, including usability and utility aspects and making sure those are distributed across various users. So my thinking, though, also here comes from like working in Boise State with Soleil for 7 years of seeing like we were approaching different sets of problems from different perspectives, but there also was this fundamental commonality of trying to ensure that IR systems are being good for everybody, being good for children, being good for various providers of the content, et cetera. And there's a unifying thinking here. But as I've been thinking through this and trying to work on and really get a solid theory of what am I trying to do with all this fairness research and work and why, and seeing how fairness discourse gets used and misused, thinking about, is the goal to make the information retrieval system fair? Is the goal to make everyone able to access information retrieval systems? Or is the goal something else? Is that a means to a further goal, such as promoting a well-informed society, promoting equity of economic opportunity? And if we aren't clear on means versus goals, then when the means runs into the limit and we're treating it as a goal, we can wind up in making some dodgy decisions. One of the specific challenges that I've been thinking about, and this is particularly happening in United States political discourse, but there are similar dynamics happening around the world. And so one of the things that happens in the US tech political discourse is that we have people complaining about that, like YouTube is discriminating against them or Google is discriminating against them, et cetera, by like taking down their content or deranking it or things like that. And in some of those cases, they're like, I'm being discriminated against because of my political views. And the counter argument is, you're just hitting the hate speech detector more often or the misinformation detector more often. And so if you have, say, a political group that is disproportionately producing more verifiable misinformation and hate speech, their stuff's going to get taken down more frequently if the hate speech detector is doing its job. And so if we we need to be fair on everybody's own terms to every group, you wind up being in places like, okay, do we need to be fair to this? But that might interfere with the broader societal goal of not having our information ecosystem just full of hate speech. And so thinking about what the goal is versus what the means is helps us start to think about. That's the big thing that I want you to take away from today. So how do we enact? So that's example is on the provider side, people wanting to provide harmful information. But there's also then on the consumer side of what if you have coherent groups of people who want harmful information and they believe that it's true information. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But so how do we start to wrestle with these? Where can we go? I want to start by talking about institutionalized ethics as implemented in codes of ethics for various organizations. And look to those for perhaps a starting point on how we can start to think about this set of challenges and these sets of questions and how we can start to think about why we're doing what we're doing in this room here today. So the ACM Code of Ethics for the Association of Computing Machinery, its first major bullet point is to contribute to society and human well-being and acknowledge that all people are stakeholders in computing. And it goes on to talk about It goes then into detail about using skills as computing professionals for the benefit of society, for the benefit of people, for the benefit of the environment, promoting fundamental human rights, rights to autonomy, etc. We go down a little bit further in the Code of Ethics, and we have this point. Be fair and take action not to discriminate. Point 1.2 is avoid harm, which is also really, really important. And I'm glad they put that before this. Like, oh, our system is fair. It hurts everybody. But be fair and take action not to discriminate. And one of the things that I like about what the drafters of this code did is this is proactive. It doesn't say, don't deliberately discriminate. And it doesn't say, oh, go do your thing. And if someone brings discrimination to your attention, do something about it. It says, take action not to discriminate. Be actively involved in the process of making our systems non-discriminatory. And that connects with what we're doing here today of if we've got a system that people can't use, there's good grounds to consider that discriminatory. If your search system has no accessibility, so it cannot be used by visually impaired readers who need to use a screen reader, your system is discriminatory against visually impaired users. And so that, already from this point, we can derive the need to work on IR4U2. And computing professionals should foster fair participation of all people, including underrepresented groups, avoid prejudicial discrimination on a long list of things. And so we have this kind of baked into computing codes of ethics, but not only computing. The International Federation of Library Associations, which is the international group that various national library associations are affiliated with, they have a code of ethics for librarians and other information professionals. We're here working on information retrieval. We are information professionals. And their first principle is to ensure access to information for all. That librarians and information workers, or information professionals, have a responsibility to work to ensure that everybody has access to information. It is fading. Just a moment here. Make that stop interrupting us. Okay. And this is the first pillar of the IFLA Code of Ethics. The core, this is foundational and core to librarian ethics. The second pillar, a section of the IFLA Code, talks about responsibility towards individuals in society. And it talks about the need to work to promote inclusion and eradicate discrimination, the need to do that, ensuring that the right to access information is not denied and equitable services are provided for everyone, whatever their age, whatever their physical or mental ability, etc. And so it goes on at length about the need to make sure that information, and by extension, the systems that we build to facilitate and mediate access to that information, are able to be used by everyone. It also talks about the need to provide people with access to information in their language. That library work and information work should be promoting and fostering the ability to access information in people's own language, especially in language minority situations. Sometimes that can run up against significant forces that are trying to use linguistic homogeneity to remove cultures from visible participation in society. And also, there's an element of autonomy here. Librarians and other information workers organize and present content in a way that allows an autonomous user to find the information they need. And so it's not just like, oh, I hand you the information, but systems that enable people to take ownership of their information access, or systems and human interactions, so that we're enabling people to find information and to find the information that they need and that they want. So we can see from all of these that the work we're doing here today, ensuring that everybody has fair access, has effective access to information retrieval, is essential to upholding and to carrying out these duties that have been laid out in these codes of ethics for various professional societies. And this includes children, language learners, neurodivergent users of various types, disabled users, etc. And so making sure that, if we take these codes seriously, we have a moral obligation to be doing this work, or an ethical obligation. Those are different. Ethical obligation to be doing this work. These codes, especially the IFLA code, they go beyond just saying we need to do this. They talk about purposes and reasons. So the IFLA code says ensure access to information for all for personal development, education, cultural enrichment, leisure, and informed participation in and enhancement of democracy. This is not a value-neutral code, and this is not a politically neutral code. This code carries within it commitments to certain types of political orders and the need for librarians to promote those types. And in the prologue to the IFLA code, it talks about how, and motivates the whole code with that librarianship is, in its very essence, an ethical activity embodying a value-rich approach. So the whole code is premised on the idea that the information work is not a value-neutral endeavor. So there's also reasons. They say in responsibilities involving to promote inclusion and eradicate discrimination. There's a purpose to providing this access. That purpose is heavily contested, at least in my country right now, where we have substantial arguments and forces working against inclusion, working to retrench discrimination. But the Code of Ethics includes this commitment. So there's a lot we can work with here in terms of thinking about why. Why? Because I'm carrying out my duties under the IFLA Code of Ethics. But there's some complexity that can start to arise from some of these. So what happened here? Okay. So, responsibility, ignore the code that's over it. There will be a background in a moment. There's this line in here. I changed my animation. It broke. Political belief as one of the things along which discrimination is not allowed. This winds up starting to get into some layers of complexity. There's a bunch of political beliefs that are in live discussion in the United States and elsewhere. How do we interact with these political beliefs, particularly ones that are predicated on the harm and exclusion of others, or that are intended to support the harm and exclusion of others, when it comes to information access? And so does providing fair information access, does that entail providing access to information that reinforces political beliefs that are aimed at the exclusion and oppression of other people? E.E. Lawrence took up this question in a paper in, I think, 2020 in the Journal of Documentation, looking at the question of what he called oppressive tastes. And so he was concerned with, particularly he was looking at a service called Reader's Advisory, but it applies to librarianship more broadly. And the U.S. Reader's Advisory is a service where you go to the Reader's Advisory librarian at your library, and you tell them, you work with them to find books to read, particularly for fiction, but not only. But they're a library service that helps people find things that they want to read. And he was concerned with the question of patrons coming with what he called oppressive taste. And there's at least a couple different versions of oppressive taste considered in this article, which were, one, discriminatory taste in the form of you've got a reader and they only want to read books written by men. Do you provide diverse reading suggestions to them? Another is taste for oppressive content. They want to read books that feature violent misogyny. How does the responsible Reader's Advisory librarian respond to these kinds of articulated information needs? And is Reader's Advisory and other library services, are they value neutral, where the goal is to take the patron's need or desire at face value and advise and meet it? Or is there a different set of values in play where you say, yeah, I don't care that you only want to read books by the majority ethnic group. We're going to give you diverse reading suggestions anyway, or maybe especially. And his conclusion and what he argued is that, yes, the librarians do need to engage in that value-driven work to not just take those oppressive tastes at face value and reinforce them. And he grounds this and connects it in some things that we've already seen in the IFLA code. He says that on the view advanced here, oppressive tastes function as real obstacles to collective self-governance. They undermine democracy because they systematically distort our judgments of the credibility, empathic accessibility, and fundamental worth of our democratic citizens. And concluded that, yes, librarians should work to promote reading and promote material that encourages us to see our neighbors as valuable, to understand their experiences, their struggles, the oppression they've experienced, as an input to our democratic process. One way then a place where we can start to think about how this works out is, it says, the IFLA code says equitable services. But what is equitable? Is equitable service where all of the users get information that they subjectively perceive as satisfying their need, regardless of whether that need is an oppressive taste, regardless of whether that need is information that reinforces their belief that COVID was created by lizard people from space? Or is it accurate information related to the user's topical interest, even if they do not perceive it as accurate? Which of these is an equitable service? The code doesn't say, but I would argue that this is where we can start to think more richly about how is what we're doing engaging with the duties and the responsibilities and the potential challenges. So, about 5 minutes left, so I will probably move quickly through a few of the points, but basically, as you think about this complexity, there's complex questions in terms of who's potentially being harmed, and it's not necessarily the person in front of us. The oppressive taste situation, the person who's coming to the library, they might be harmed in the sense of reinforcing oppressive beliefs might be a harm, but also they're getting those reinforced as harm to their neighbors. And the goal, thinking about what our goal is, as Lawrence did, thinking about the goal of promoting understanding our neighbors as a part of the democratic process gives us guidance to think about how we want to navigate some of these challenges. So, politics, briefly. We can see also in these IFLA codes, as I said, the IFLA code it's a value-rich proposition that is committed to a certain type of democratic order. Also, it's democratic order. Also, a certain type of democratic order. They talk about things like informed participation and promote inclusion. This sounds a lot to me like pluralistic deliberative democracy. The ACM code has a lot of similar things, but it has a different emphasis. It focuses on equality, tolerance, and respect, but it focuses a lot more on autonomy, and it has kind of more of an economic flavor to it. If we want to debate theories of democracy, it sounds like liberal democracy, but also both of them are heavily committed to pluralistic forms of those democracies. Really, really quick sidebar. I want to just let you know this paper exists because it's fascinating. So Sana Brian Hoke and her collaborators did this piece where they looked at IR diversity metrics and how they map to specific theories of democracy, liberal democracy, participatory deliberative. And this is just to show you that thinking about what it is that we're trying to achieve doesn't only impact like how we design the research, the kind of applications we build. It can have direct impacts in like what IR metrics we use, because like this one maps to deliberative democracy. So as we're thinking about these goals, I think what's really interesting and useful to think of is what is our desired state for society with regards to information or in general? How do we see people participating in that state, either benefiting from that state or doing work that brings us to that state? And then what is the role for this room of information retrieval in that process? And when we put these together, we're talking about what's called a theory of change. Theory of change is a concept that comes from sociology. It also shows up in environmental research and things. All of us have a theory of change. We just don't necessarily talk about them. But a theory of change consists of what desired future we're trying to work for. Everyone can access information retrieval, or the future that we want that to build to. And a piece of like, we're taking specific actions in order to try to bring that world about. Why? And so the theory of change gets us to why do we believe that this action is going to bring us closer to that desired end state? Different theories of change will lead to different actions to the same desired end state. So we need to, like, we all have them, but we need to explicitly articulate them and think about, like, why do I believe that doing this work is going to get me there? I want to talk super briefly about what we are inviting people to when we're involved in information access, because we tend to treat it as good. Hey, people get access to information retrieval. But this paper, a criminally undercited paper by Belkin and Robertson in 1976, they were concerned with the ability for findings in information science to be used against the users. It's like the work we're doing on how to facilitate people accessing information, how can that be misused, particularly to what they called sender-oriented systems, propaganda machines? Like, how can the theories that we build of how people access information, how can they be flipped around to build systems that push particular messages and shape the discourse of our society? The Pope is also interested in this question. So, in a missive for the World Day of Peace, Pope Francis wrote about AI in general, and also said a number of things about search and recommendation in particular, and talked about algorithms that enable them, platform providers, to control mental and relational habits, often without our knowledge. In a space like the web marked by information overload, they can structure the flow of data according to criteria of selection that are not always perceived by the user. This is what Belkin and Robertson were talking about too. The ability to build systems that structure what we see and how we see it and how the data flows in ways that can have subtle and manipulative effects on society. So there's lots of reason to be concerned about this. There's also, then this gets to, we bring someone in, we give them better access to information retrieval. Are we giving them better access to being manipulated by the structure and control of the flow of information? Now, it still may well be a better state than they had before, but that's something to think about. Information and resources, opportunity, manipulation, exploitation. Are we making it easier for people to be grist for the surveillance capitalism machine? On whose terms? Are we doing this in a way that respects individual and community autonomy? And are we doing it in a way that equitably distributes the benefits and the costs of information retrieval? This book talks a lot about that, not specifically about information retrieval. I've got a QR code on the last slide that will take you to my slide deck too. So, and who gets to be involved in design of these things? And this, who gets to be involved in design of these things? And are people being designed for or being designed with? One of the big challenges I think I would like to see information retrieval work on in the next 5-10 years. How do we enable people to design the information retrieval systems they are interact with, not just use the ones others have designed? So what do we do with all of this? Access to information, effective access to information, expanding that effective access is really, really important for ethical reasons, for political reasons, for economic reasons. But there's tensions that happen in this. There's competing interests and harms. There's questions of how power is allocated. And so we want to be clear. It's important to be clear, I believe, about why we're doing this work and to let that why guide us. So you can find slides there, as well as the bibliography with links. And I'm happy to take questions or discussions.